Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. Now before we continue, you need to be familiar with Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. You could have either read it, listened to it, watched it, or have studied it in class previously. As per usual, I'll start by summarising the plot. We'll then look at the key characters, themes and contextual knowledge we need. I'll then identify a couple of key quotes and techniques you may wish to memorise for your exam, and I'll leave you with a couple of tasks you can complete after the video. So, what happens in Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth? Well, King Duncan asks for a report on what's happened to the Thane of Cawdor, and his eldest son Malcolm reports that the traitorous Thane of Cawdor has been executed. So you will remember that there was a battle between the Norwegians and the Scottish, and the Thane of Cawdor, who is Scottish and who should be loyal to King Duncan in Scotland, has betrayed them and decided to join with the Norwegians, presumably because if they won he would have got a greater reward. However, thanks to Macbeth and Banquo, the Scottish won and the Thane of Cawdor was captured. Now he has betrayed his king, and that crime is called treason, and the punishment for treason is death, so he has been executed. Shakespeare doesn't give any details as to how the Thane of Cawdor was executed. Instead, he leaves that to the gory minds of the audience. So Macbeth, Banquo, Angus and Ross then arrive on the scene, and King Duncan profusely thanks Macbeth and Banquo for their efforts defeating the Norwegians and ensuring Scotland is safe and King Duncan himself is safe. So King Duncan's feeling quite happy. His throne is intact. His country has remained, Scottish. It hasn't been invaded and overtaken. So he makes a few announcements born out of joy. The first announcement he makes is that his eldest son Malcolm will be his heir. That means Malcolm will inherit the Scottish throne once King Duncan dies. Now, if you remember in a previous video, I taught you about the divine right of kings. This is the idea that God has decided who and has chosen who the king shall be, and sort of trusts that person to rule over the people. So then it's up to the king to decide who will be his heir, who will inherit the throne after him. And it was traditional for the king to choose his eldest son to inherit the throne. So what King Duncan's doing by announcing Malcolm will be the heir to his throne would have been in line with what God wants. It would have been in line with what society at the time would have expected. King Duncan's still feeling very joyful, so he announces that they will all visit Macbeth's castle in Inverness, which is in Scotland, to have a feast to celebrate. Firstly, to celebrate the fact that the Scottish defeated the Norwegians. Secondly, to celebrate that Macbeth has been promoted to Thane of Cawdor. Thirdly, to celebrate that Malcolm has been announced as the heir to the throne of Scotland. And at the very end of the scene, Macbeth in an aside reveals some information. An aside is when a character speaks their mind out, and only the audience can hear an aside. The other characters on stage cannot hear it. So in this aside, Macbeth reveals that Malcolm is an obstacle that he must overcome. Macbeth's goal now is to become the King of Scotland because he believes the three witches' prediction, and he wants to claim the throne of Scotland. But now Malcolm has been announced as the next in line to the throne. So Macbeth needs to overcome Malcolm if he is going to be the King of Scotland and fulfill the third prophecy. And Macbeth asks that heaven does not look upon him and his actions. And this hints that Macbeth is going to go about overcoming Malcolm in an evil way. He doesn't want God to look down and judge his actions. So this suggests he has sinister intentions for King Duncan and Malcolm. So who are our key characters in this scene? We have King Duncan, and he is largely presented as a good ruler. However, he does have a flaw, and that is he is a bit too trusting. This is what Duncan says about the previous Thane of Cawdor, the traitor. Duncan says, "He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust," suggesting that Duncan trusted the old Thane of Cawdor 100%, and then the Thane of Cawdor betrayed him. This maybe suggests that King Duncan doesn't have a good ability to judge people's character. And he's just announced he's going to go to Macbeth's house for a feast. Maybe this is also another example of King Duncan being a bad judge of character. Malcolm is King Duncan's eldest son, and in accordance with God and the divine right of kings and society's expectations, he's pronounced as heir to the Scottish throne. So he will inherit the Scottish throne should anything happen to King Duncan. And because of this, he's been promoted to the title Prince of Cumberland. Macbeth also arrives in the scene, and externally he shows he's very loyal to the crown. When King Duncan is celebrating Macbeth winning the battle against the Norwegians, Macbeth actually says, "I did it because I owe you service and I owe you loyalty. I defeated the Norwegians out of my love for you." But we know that internally, thanks to the aside at the end of the scene, Macbeth actually is not loyal to the crown anymore, and instead he's plotting to usurp power. That means he wants to wrongfully take the power. Banquo, on the other hand, is externally and internally loyal to the crown. He's received predictions from the witches that his kids will be kings, but he's not willing to act upon it. He's loyal to the crown. He's a wholly good character. And now remember, King James I descended from Banquo's line, the real Banquo's line. So Shakespeare would have known this, and he wanted to curry favour from the king, which is why Banquo is presented as a 100% good character. So what are the key themes or ideas we can pick out from Act 1, Scene 4? The theme of loyalty is key. Loyalty is having an allegiance towards something or someone. Banquo is loyal to the crown, and again, this portrays him as good. This would have been expected in the warrior culture and as a man at the time, that he was loyal to his king, his country, his god, and Banquo is a wholly good character at this. Again, Shakespeare is currying favour with King James I. Macbeth, on the other hand, is beginning to show signs of being disloyal. He believes the witches' predictions and he wants to make them a reality, and he's willing to do unethical, immoral things to get that. King Duncan is presented as being a bit too loyal to the wrong people. I did say he was a good ruler, and largely he is presented as a good ruler. However, he did have two traitors. MacDonald and the old Thane of Cawdor turned their back on King Duncan. So clearly he's not a good judge of character. He trusts the wrong people, and sometimes his loyalty can be betrayed. And he's about to trust Macbeth by visiting Macbeth's castle in Inverness. And maybe he's again misplaced his loyalty and trust in a dodgy Thane. The next key theme we have is ambition. Banquo and Macbeth have both received promising predictions from the witches, but Banquo is content with his lot in life. He doesn't want to act upon the promises. If they happen naturally, I'm sure he'll be delighted that his children become kings, but he's not going to take matters into his own hands. He doesn't have that ambition. Whereas Macbeth is the opposite. He's received good predictions and he is willing to do what it takes to make those predictions come true. So Macbeth is clearly ambitious. Now, personally, I think having ambition is a good quality in a person, but here Shakespeare is clearly warning the audience that if you are too ambitious, and particularly if your ambition involves doing immoral and unethical things, such as committing regicide, there will be serious consequences, which Macbeth faces later on in the play. We also have the theme of the supernatural. Now, there are no witches in this scene. However, their prophecies still influence Macbeth's actions. But bear in mind, the witches aren't the only supernatural thing we need to consider. If you're supernatural, you're beyond the laws of nature. You're outside of our the rules of our space-time continuum, and God would apply to that. He's supernatural, he's outside the laws of physics, etc. And God plays an important role in Act 1, Scene 4. God has set the divine right of kings in order. So he's placed King Duncan at the top. He's created the great chain of being, the order of the universe that shouldn't be interrupted and subverted. And God also watches over everything going on Earth, which is why Macbeth, in his aside at the end, asks God to turn his head away and not look at him, because he's going to commit a crime that might ultimately land him in hell. So, what key contextual knowledge do you need to understand Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth? Well, let's continue looking at this idea of God and, in particular, Christianity. So in Jacobean Britain, which is in the 17th century, it was a mostly Christian society. At the time, it was split between Catholicism and Protestantism, which are two branches of Christianity, and they really didn't get on well at the time. But that is not particularly relevant to Macbeth. What you do need to know is that the audience who were watching Shakespeare's Macbeth would have been Christian and would have believed in God. Furthermore, in 11th century Scotland, also called Alba, where the play is set, that was also a mostly Christian society. So what this means is that belief in God would have been ubiquitous. Everyone would have believed in God. And Christian morality would have been rife in society. So this Christian idea of what is right and wrong, maybe you want to think about the Ten Commandments, these would have been widely held as good moral beliefs that should be upheld in society. Also, the idea of heaven and hell were prevalent. That means pretty much everyone believed in it. And fundamental. It was fundamental to how you behaved. If you behaved badly on earth, you will end up in hell. If you behaved well on earth, you will end up in heaven. And this underpins society, both in the Jacobean era and in 11th century Scotland. So the idea that God created a chain of being, and through the divine right of kings, put a king in charge to rule over the people, everyone would have accepted that belief. Or this idea of the Ten Commandments and thou shalt not murder, everyone would have accepted that morality. And this idea that if you're bad, you go to hell, and you're good, you go to heaven, again, everyone would have accepted these consequences for their actions. So, what key quotes would I look to memorise? Well, King Duncan says, "He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust," when he refers to the traitorous old Thane of Cawdor. And I would zoom in on the two key words, absolute trust. Trust is an abstract noun, it's a thing, but you can't touch it. And absolute is an adjective. An absolute suggests that King Duncan trusted the traitorous Thane of Cawdor wholeheartedly, 100% trust. And this is clear evidence that King Duncan is not a very good judge of character, because the old Thane of Cawdor betrayed him, committed treason, and was ultimately executed. When Macbeth arrives on the scene and King Duncan is full of praise for Macbeth, Macbeth responds, "The service and the loyalty I owe." That means you don't have to thank me for killing the Norwegians and winning the battle. That's part of the service and loyalty I owe you. This is links to the theme of loyalty. And initially Macbeth was very loyal to King Duncan and to the throne. But through the witch's prophecies, he's been corrupted into trying to usurp power. And internally, he's having some quite disloyal thoughts, including killing the king and working out how he's going to get rid of Malcolm so he can ascend and take the throne of Scotland. King Duncan had said, "We will establish our estate upon our eldest Malcolm," and later titles him Prince of Cumberland. So this ties back in with God putting kings in charge and giving them the divine right of kings, giving them the authority to decide who is next in line, and traditionally that's usually the eldest son. However, this statement directly contradicts the witch's third prophecy, which is that Macbeth shall hereafter be king. So this is the phrase that sort of spurs Macbeth into action, if you will. He has to do something now to take the throne, because if he does nothing, Malcolm will inherit the throne, and Macbeth will be third in line. The Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else o'erleap. When Macbeth says this is part of the aside, so no other characters on stage can hear it, only the audience. And this is a metaphor. Here Macbeth is comparing the Prince of Cumberland to a step, as in like stairs. So if you imagine each step of the stair is a part of Macbeth's journey to the throne. So step 1 might be being Thane of Glamis, step 2 might be being Thane of Cawdor, step 3 is where Malcolm is, and step 4 is when he finally gets to be King of Scotland. So here is a metaphor. Macbeth will eventually have to step on step 3, Malcolm, and he may slip and fall down. He may fall from Malcolm, go back down to being Cawdor, back down to being Glamis, maybe even lower down on the staircase. Or he can overleap, he can jump over Malcolm and get to that 4th step, which is being King of Scotland, which is what he wants and what he believes he's entitled to, since the witches have given him that 3rd prophecy. And later on in the aside, Macbeth says, "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my deep and black desires." And if you're looking for techniques here, you've got rhyme between fires and desires, and you've got contrast between light imagery and dark imagery. What's going on here is that Macbeth acknowledges there's a God in heaven looking down on him and judging his actions. And if you imagine the sky as like a blanket between earth and heaven, and the night sky is like a dark blanket, so through the darkness maybe God can't see what's happening on earth. However, the stars are maybe like holes that have been poked in the blanket, and these little pockets of light allow God to see what's happening on earth in the nighttime. So Macbeth is asking the stars to hide their fires, to stop shining, to stop behaving like little pockets in the blanket of night, and that they should cover up themselves. And as a result, God can't look through the sky. There's no openings for him to look through. He can't see Macbeth committing evil actions, and Macbeth's soul will be spared from hell. And we get this idea of good and bad through the contrast of light and darkness. You know, light is being seen as godly and good and holy, and darkness being seen as sort of evil and dangerous. So what can you do to solidify your knowledge? I suggest you make some notes from this video on a physical copy of the play. You can then go on to answer the question, explore the theme of loyalty in Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. I'd look to maybe write 3 paragraphs here. One paragraph, I'd look at how Banquo is loyal both internally and externally, and how the witch's prophecies don't change his mind on loyalty. Loyalty to the king and to God comes first, prophecies come second. I would then contrast that with Macbeth, who's the opposite. Externally, he's loyal to the throne and to King Duncan, but internally he's plotting evil, unethical actions to get the throne. Clearly, the witch's prophecy has turned him from a loyal character into a disloyal character. And finally, I'd actually look at King Duncan's loyalty in the sense of who he trusts, whether or not he's a good judge of character. He's already had the old Thane of Cawdor and MacDonald betray him, and now he's about to put his trust in Macbeth by going to stay at Macbeth's castle in Inverness. Clearly, King Duncan is loyal to his Thanes, but his Thanes aren't always loyal back to him. Okay, so if you found this video useful for your understanding of Shakespeare's Macbeth, please give it a like. Please also subscribe to Mr. Hardy YouTube channel so you don't miss out on the rest of the Macbeth series and other series I'm working on. And please also leave a comment if you think there's any other key quotes, techniques or knowledge that students and teachers should know about Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.